we say, well, the organizing principle of my life is the hunt for resources. We understand tangible resources. We understand the house and the car. We understand the food in the fridge. We understand the ability to go out for dinner and to go on vacations because they're tangible and they're in our hands. You know what we really don't understand as a resource is time. I've got this in-hand symbol that I have successfully roamed, killed, and gotten food. And I will acquire it long past adequacy. Well, why? Because, again, you are programmed to roam looking for food. And so if you ran into a whole lot of it, what you did was you hoarded it. The instinct is gather resources and hoard. And it makes sense because we didn't have this constant drip delivery of resources that we have now. It was sporadic and cyclical. So none of that is nonsensical, except now it completely and totally is.
Hello and welcome to the Optimal Agency Podcast. My name is Patrick Cummings. I'm joined, as always, by John Gilson. Together with you, we are exploring the ideas of agency, diving deep to discover a set of guidelines on how each of us can best operate in the day-to-day to maximize our personal autonomy, professional freedom, and ultimately our positive impact on the world. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. How you doing, John?
I am planted, my friend.
Happy to hear that. All right, my friend. Every other week, we have a longer discussion here on the show on how we can own our lives by becoming optimal agents. That's what we've got this episode. And then tune in next week and every other week for a shorter episode where we answer one of your questions. What we've got this week, we're continuing our series of conversations on our behaviors. Our first this week of 6 behaviors of the time aware. And then we'll wrap up with a quick chat about some of the rules and behaviors that you and I, John, are currently putting some time, energy, and focus into. Ready?
I'm ready.
We're going to dive into behavior number 1 of the time aware. And as always, a quick reminder, we've got 6 rules of health, wealth, and time. We've got 6 behaviors of each one of those disciplines. We've had episodes so far on the behaviors, the first of the behaviors of health and wealth. Today, we're going to dive into behavior number 1 of the time aware. As I like to do, I'm going to give you all 6 so you kind of have a sense of the context. Behavior number 1, what we're going to talk about today, choose more time instead of more income. Behavior 2, allow enthusiasm to dictate action. Behavior 3, decline with grace. 4, set aside ample time for building and maintaining health. Number 5, decompress with intention. And behavior number 6 of the time aware, establish expectations at the start. Where shall we begin? Behavior number 1, choose more time instead of more income. That is countercultural.
It's countercultural and probably counterintuitive depending on where you are in your own accumulation of wealth. Mm-hmm. I want to tell you what it is, Pat. It's a reaction. You know, as I'm sitting there thinking about the biggest changes that have occurred in my life since the beginning of this project, and really even earlier, the things that sparked optimal agency and wanting to do this, it was the shift in organizing principle of my life from get wealthier to have more time. And the attendant happiness and peace that has come from that shift in organizing principle from, I need to make as much money as I can to how do I make my time my own has been watershed. I feel like a completely different person. And so, you know, my goal with this today is to convince you listening that I want time freedom to be the organizing principle of your life. And I think we can start with what I was reacting to. I was reacting to a corporate 9-to-5 and a corporate 9-to-5 where I was very highly remunerated and constantly stressed and miserable because I didn't have enough agency in that position. I was constantly being roadblocked by those senior to me. I was feeling like I couldn't accomplish my objectives. I was diving into coping behaviors as a result from that stress, whether those coping behaviors looked like mostly it was eating too much sugar-filled junk food and processed junk. It was spending my weekends kind of just having a cheat day that actually was a like, how do I kill myself with ice cream weekend so I could get back to Monday and cope with it. And what happened there was they kept paying me more and more money. And so it became a set of golden handcuffs, which, people understand. And if I quit the job, what would happen is my income would go from really kind of an astronomical sum to zero extremely quickly. And so you're in this golden handcuff bind of how do I get time freedom here? And I think like a lot of people, the pandemic opened it up for me. It said, well, wait a minute. You don't have to spend time at the job. You have to get the job done. And that's such a radical shift in saying, hey, this isn't about 8 hours of FaceTime. This is about output. And can you deliver that output? So that became the beginning of this thought. And this was in 2021, so not so long ago, that anyone with any modicum of skills in the tech world was being recruited like crazy. And recruiters were coming out of the woodwork to talk to me to bring my essential business development skills, my sales skills onto their staffs. And I was being offered jobs that paid even more than the job that I already had, but inevitably would have required not a 9 to 5, but a 7 a.m. to 7 p. And email comes in on the weekends. And could you travel to New York City every other week? And could you come down to Boston and do this? And so there's this opportunity set in front of me to make more money that I didn't need and to have less time at the same time. And in considering those opportunities, it became really obvious to me really quickly that it would have been very dumb of me to get more money when what I really needed was my time to be my own. And it's such a hard psychological shift, Patrick, because time for income is our default way of measuring our own status in our heads.
Yep.
How much do you do? What do you do? How much do you make? What's your net worth? And it's so easy to conflate your job title and your bank account with your self-worth.
That leads to, I think, the first big question I have, and you started that with this concept of reorganizing or our organizing principle being one thing. And the argument we're making is your organizing principle should be more time. And so I want to ask about, one, what do you mean when you say organizing principle? And two, why is our organizing principle in your mind the time for money paradigm? And I guess there's a third question, which I'll remind you of these, but I'm just, as I think of them, which is, I don't know that most people have an organizing principle. And so we default to maybe this time for money thing, right? So somewhere in there is, I think, a really interesting question around how do you know what your organizing principle is? And once you identify it, how do you begin to shift it from whatever the default is, or from whatever society says, or from whatever it happens to be, to this more agency-minded one?
So you can have a conscious organizing principle, which is what I'm advocating for. You can have an unconscious one, the default. And an organizing principle is really simple. What do your behaviors demonstrate that you value most? And so if your organizing principle is dollars, your behaviors will illustrate that you care most about wealth and the status and prestige that comes with the titles that come with the money. So are you spending more than half of your waking hours at the behest of an employer or thinking about your job, right? Well, that would suggest that your organizing principle is your job. Are you spending more than half of your waking hours caring for your family, your friends, your children, and your community? Well, that would indicate that your organizing principle might be community, connection, and family, right? Are you spending most of your day electively pursuing the things that you wish to pursue because you've created the time to pursue them? Well, that would indicate that the organizing principle of your life is time. Why do we default to dollars? I think, to be a little too pseudoscientific, we used to have to roam all day to find food. That was the organizing principle. Not dying was the organizing principle and the amassing of resource. Well, now we're several steps removed from that. But if you look through the Industrial Revolution, if you look through the bifurcation, or not even the bifurcation, but the splintering of work among many subspecialties, we introduced currency so that we could get the resources we needed while being specialists in the thing we were good at, and other people could get that resource through us. It became barter, and then the way of universal barter becomes currency. Okay, so getting dollars is actually the pursuit of resources. We get dollars because we're wandering around looking for food all day. The more dollars you have, the more resources you have. The more resources you have, the more likely it is that you procreate. So it's the more likely that you can attract a mate, that you have the resources to care for children through what is the longest gestational period of any animal anywhere, right? Which used to be 18 years and now seems to be 28 years, right? And so, yeah, the organizing principle is money, because money is what gets us those things. Now, here's the problem. In the last 100 years, poverty has been halved and then halved again. And that's not accurate, but it's directionally accurate. Most people aren't hungry. Most people aren't unsheltered. Now, there are people who are unsheltered, but it's not most of us. And if you're listening to this, I guarantee it's not you. Right. And so we say, well, the organizing principle of my life is the hunt for resources. Well, we understand tangible resources. We understand the house and the car. We understand the food in the fridge. We understand the ability to go out for dinner and to go on vacations, because they're tangible and they're in our hands. You know what we really, really don't understand as a resource is time. And so think about this. I've got this in hand symbol that I have successfully roamed, killed, and gotten food. And I will acquire it long past adequacy. Well, why? Because, again, you are programmed to roam looking for food. And so if you ran into a whole lot of it, what you did was you hoarded it. Hopefully you shared it with the reciprocity principle that other people would share when you didn't have any. But the instinct is gather resources and hoard. And it makes sense, because we didn't have this constant drip delivery of resources that we have now. It was sporadic and cyclical. So none of that is nonsensical, except now it completely and totally is. And we need to reprogram our brains.
Got it. In line with that, thinking about maybe your own story to bridge us into it, what are the questions that you ask yourself, and what are the questions we can ask ourselves to begin to shift from, again, this default state to this organizing principle of time ownership?
It was really simple for me. It was, I knew what my values were, and I wrote them down. And I said, one of mine is no stress. And that's not literal, but it's directional. I don't want to be stressed out. And I looked around at the people who I was supposed to be aspiring to be, right? So I'm a senior director of XYZ, and I'm looking at the vice presidents, and I'm looking at the C-suite that I report into. And these people are taking calls on Saturday, and they somehow decided the workday started at 7 a.m. You know, you're getting like meeting invites for 7 a.m. I'm like, fuck that. No, hard stop. No, you know, and the next step for me literally was people saying, don't you want to be one of us? And I'm just looking at these people with their hair turning gray and their shit schedules, and they've got all the money in the world and no time to spend it on anything other than status items. I got a bigger house. Oh, that's a nice Mercedes. Who cares? And I literally sat there and said, and this wasn't a flip decision. You know, I was sitting there literally considering, because I've got status John. He's real. The guy who's seeking authority and fame and status, that person doesn't not exist. I mean, we're on a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This
I
is
have three
someone.
podcasts.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. At some level, I'd like to be recognized. We seek
Yep.
status. And so this
Yep.
is battling on one hand. And on the other hand, I'm going, man, I live in New Hampshire. I've got access to my mountain bike. I've got access to my snowboard. I've got a girlfriend who loves me. I've got a house full of fuzzy buddies that love me. I can go outside and whatever, cut down a tree, organize some brush, do an activity, but I can't do that if I let Status John win in the game that's being played by these people. And so for me, the thing that went through my head was, and I'm sitting here with offer letters ready to sign, literally, and going, do I want to put a signature on this? And here's how it actually went down. So the first time, it was a company out of New York City that recruited me to be a vice president of business development. I negotiated the salary. I negotiated the equity. It was a sweet deal. And I'm sitting there getting ready to sign it. And I sent them a note. I said, I'm sorry, I'm out. They're like, what the hell do you mean? We just negotiated your salary. Like, what do you mean you're out? I said, well, I'm out, And then about 3 or 4 months later, another opportunity comes up. Another company, this one in Boston, calls and says, will you come do business development for us? And I went down, I interviewed with them. Cool company doing cool things that really align with my history in health and fitness, my desire to make people healthier and better, et cetera. And again, I'm sitting here looking at that. They're like, we'll send an offer letter in the morning. And this time I got ahead of it slightly. I called them and I said, don't send me an offer letter. They said, why not? I said, because I'm not going to sign it. I'm not going to sign it. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your time. I'm sorry, but I'm out. It took me 2 confrontations with status and money in my face to say, is this what you really want? And the answer was no.
So how do you start to identify what you do want? I mean, because those are, it's 2 sides of the same coin. Oh, I don't want that can often put us not in a much better place, because now you've opened a loop and, well, what do I want? And obviously, big surprise, this conversation is about time and time freedom and time ownership. And so was that easy for you to have identified, like, why am I so resistant to this? Oh, it's because I want this, and that is in opposition of this time freedom.
I knew what I didn't want more than I knew what I wanted. And it wasn't just not wanting those jobs, because I want those jobs. I love being challenged, at least theoretically. Right? I didn't want to be stressed out, because here's the thing. I am a bad person when I'm stressed out in my own estimation. And I realize we're our own worst critic, but here are the things I do when I'm stressed out. I eat poorly. I don't exercise. I am quick to anger. I yell when I could quietly say what I think. I don't sleep. I wake up at 2 a.m. and I stare at the ceiling and go, oh my God, what about the XYZ? And I have to come up with a multifactorial strategy to overcome the roadblock put in by executive LMNOP, and our competitors coming out with this next week. And oh my God, if they do that. I didn't want the demons to come anymore. I wanted to be a better person more than I wanted money. And so I understood that what I had to do was get more time. And I already had the tools in my back pocket. And I think that helped a lot with the decision. I already knew how to do what I wanted to do, which was to get more time, but not to be poor in the process. And so the entire time, and I worked at Hydro, and the entire time I was being recruited by these other companies, I'd maintained my consulting business. From 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. every day, I would meet with two of my clients, and I'd walk them through their own business development, their own strategies, their own marketing, their own sales. And I understood that the way I had organized that business is those people paid me for that hour a week on a 6-month contract, and they're on a subscription. So basically every month their check comes for the time I would spend with them that month, and they were on a 6-month contract. And at the end of that 6 months, if they wanted to renew and I did too, we could. And so, and if not, we didn't. And so I had this rolling way to dial up my dollars or dial them back down, I could always take on another client, or if I needed more time, I could always let a client go. And so I had the seed of the solution in my hand as I was contemplating these essentially other opportunities to trade my time for income. And I realized that what I could do is just go all in on the thing where I had my hands on both of the levers, the lever of time and the lever of income.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And it strikes me that kind of, thinking about maybe how to get into some of the practicalities for other folks, it strikes me that there's kind of two elements here to this conversation that we're having as it relates to, first is the philosophical, the organizing principle idea. And then it's like, okay, that sounds great. How do I begin to do that? And it strikes me that there's sort of two elements of it, which is understanding how much money you need and understanding how much time you need or you want or you have. So how do we start to take this down from the clouds a bit and start to get us to a place where we can begin to make decisions, right? Because if our organizing principle is effectively what do our actions line up with, how do we start to move our actions in line with this newer organizing principle?
The less money you need, the less time you have to spend working for it.
Mm-hmm.
Odds are. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first element is, to your point, know how much you need. And I need you to do that in three facets. How much do I need to pay the bills? So that's one. Number two, how much do I need for discretionary spending? I.e., I'm not asking you to become a monk or a pauper here. How much do you need to spend to do the things you like to do? And then third, how much do you need in income to save for future you? That's classic retirement planning. You need to do that.
Yep.
And so I had that retirement planning done. I have my budget done. I knew what it costs to live my life, including my discretionary spending and my core spending. And I was earning far, far in excess of it. Right? I was saving literally 70% of my income working these jobs. So I think the other obvious point there was I had very little need and very high income. And so it was very obvious I didn't need to make all of that money. Okay, let's say you're not in that position. Let's say you need every dime you make, right? How do you begin to pursue this? There's only two levers: make more in the same amount of time, right? Or ideally make more in less time. And then the third, of course, is to need less. Need less. And I'm somewhat privileged there, right? I've been saving for 20 years. I don't have children. I'm never, ever going to pay anyone's college tuition, right? I have no debt beyond my mortgage, so there are things like that that enable that. But that in essence is what it comes down to. Now, most people are not self-employed. They're employed by somebody else. And so they don't have the fractionality of their time. In other words, let's imagine you make $100,000 a year. Well, you probably can't work 3/4 time and make $75,000 a year.
Yep.
Right? In other words, you need to work all the time to get all the money. And if you work anything less than all the time, you make none of the money. Okay, so what does that mean you need? In reality, multiple employers. And you need multiple part-time or fractional employers. That can be done in air quotes, employers being your clients through working for yourself, or literally through multiple employers, right? The third is if you are truly valuable, if you're so good they can't ignore you, go to your bosses and say, I'm here 9 to 5, 5 days a week. I would be happy to take a 25% pay cut and work here Monday through Thursday. Right? So you've got to get your hands on the ability to turn your time and money equation up or down. I hesitate to prescribe how to do that because you're only limited by your creativity on that side. You're also only limited by your creativity on the needing less side. So for instance, you have an extra bedroom in your house. Yeah, I know you're an adult. Get a roommate, right? Look at what happened to your needs. Are you single and living alone? Maybe put some more attention into finding a life partner. All your bills will be cut in half instantly. right? Are you eating out 6 times a week? Take better care of yourself, cook at home, and save all that money, right? And so it's a multifactorial equation, and it goes back to all of our rules of wealth. But the essence of being able to trade time for money is that you need to be diversified in the way that you make money.
Mm-hmm.
None of that's the point. None of that's the point. Like if you grasp that philosophically, you can start to move towards it. The point is actually that when you have time, you get to diversify your identity. And I think that's what helped me become genuinely a better version of myself, was for my identity not to be the senior director of new business at Hydro and a CrossFit coach and a guy who maybe worked out, maybe if he had some free time.
Mm-hmm.
It was that when I shed that identity of my job, of time for income as my primary determinant, I got a whole bunch of new identities because I had hours and hours. I could go from being an employee to being a mentor to my clients. And so that changed the core, the root of how I defined my work. I could go from being a CrossFit coach to somebody who lifted, who was a mountain biker, who is a painter of animal portraits. And that diversification of my identity continues. I'm working on being a mushroom farmer of all things, right? Growing oyster and shiitake mushrooms on logs in the front yard. And the more that I diversify my identity, the less stress that I have that any given identity doesn't work out. If you put 80 hours a week, and nobody does, but let's imagine you put 80 hours a week into your job, guess what your identity will be?
Yep.
It'll be your job, right? You put 30 hours a week into your kids, guess what your identity will be? Mom, dad, parent, right? You put that time into 5 or 10 different things. Well, now you have a lot of identities. Now you're harder to disappoint. Now you're better at accepting the world as it is, not as you wish it would be. And now there's a less of a delta between your expectations and reality. And that is the definition of happiness. Right? Let me narrow the delta. The gap between what I expect the world to deliver and what it does deliver. And let's say that it works out for me as a painter and a mushroom farmer and a mentor, and it doesn't work out for me as a mountain biker because, frankly, I crash more than I stay upright. Well, I'm not as fragile to that because I'm not all wrapped up in it. And so when I can trade, when I can choose more time instead of more income, I can diversify my identity. When I diversify my identity, it's easier for me to narrow the gap between what I wish the world was and what the world actually is, meaning I will be more contented generally. I wish that, and maybe you can hear in my voice, how important I think this is, but how difficult it is to pin down.
I remember when your identity, really our identity, but we'll stick with you, your identity was 99% entrepreneur. And I wonder if you would say that the lack of diversification of your identity is exactly equal to the amount of stress you had at that time, because there's only one thing to go right or wrong. And the knowledge of that one thing is incredibly stressful. And so when we talk about, we talked about that already this episode, we've talked about it before, the high priority that you at least now put on relatively no stress. Those things are an exact opposition of each other. When you're so consolidated, that one thing, and quite frankly, one thing often happens when your identity is 99% wrapped up in a single version of yourself. When one thing goes wrong and tips that, everything goes, because you've got nothing else. And I think it's really important. I don't think we appreciate nor are taught this concept of portfolio identity, we're never taught it. We're even, you know, go to high school. Like, are you a jock? Are you a theater kid? Are you a nerd? Whatever. And it's always like, what is the one thing you are? And then that carries with you until you sort of shed it like a snake skin, and you then latch on to the next thing. And so it's just really interesting to me to think about when we begin to follow this behavior. The result of it is you have more time. The result of having more time is the ability and likely the inclination to explore. And that exploration opens you up to mushroom farming or chickens or writing that you've never had time for, or whatever it might be. But to bring it all the way back to where we started, this is organizing principle. If our organizing principle is money, money is often a result of, or more money is often a result of narrowing focus, consolidating, and that eats up the time that you could then otherwise spend elsewhere. So it's just really interesting to me that this idea of, like, if you start with the organizing principle and you walk that all the way through, the end result eventually is exploration. And it's the novelty of that exploration.
And self-worth. I mean, that's the end result, right? Is self-worth in a different way. I think
talk about that more. Talk about, what do you mean by a different way of self-worth?
It is an internal gauge rather than an external gauge of who am I? How am I contributing to the world? How much benefit am I able to provide? And it's a failure-proof sense of self-worth. You know, we talk about diversification in our financial lives as the thing that keeps us rich, because one asset goes down, but another asset goes up. Well, if I have diverse sources of self-worth, if Annie's love for me is a source of self-worth, and my family and what they achieve is a source of my own self-worth, and my contribution to community and my speed on my mountain bike and my resting heart rate is part of my self-worth, and my ability to cook is part of my self-worth, and my friendship with you is part of my self-worth, and on and on and on. One of those things can go south, but they don't all go south simultaneously.
Right.
And so my self-worth becomes much less fragile. Okay. And I know what you're referring to, you know, as we talk about being in our 30s at, again, faster. I had one gauge of self-worth. Is this company growing and succeeding, or is this company not growing and succeeding? And everything that went against the company growing and succeeding was a massive hit to my self-worth. A set of barbells showed up one day with the coating fucked up, and I freaked out. And a friend of ours, Jen Kelm, literally quit her job that week because I was so wrapped up in that shit that I freaked out, and my self-worth was damaged beyond repair. And I damaged things further through my actions, through the fragility of my own self-worth. And so we see this massive negative cycle of concentration of identity. And you could make the argument that if you could be sitting in another seminar that said, how do you succeed in business? Niche down, niche down, niche down, concentrate, concentrate, concentrate until you're the man or woman who sells pink outfits to brand new female puppy owners in Nebraska.
Yep.
Right. That's
left-handed.
Left-handed. Yeah. Then they're all left-handed. And that's you, because you know exactly how to speak to those people. Isn't it hard to put on the right-handed pink puppy outfits and you win? But the thing is, you can't allow yourself to become that thing. You know, I was talking to one of my consulting clients, and she owns a very, very successful studio down in Florida. They do about $2.5 million a year in business, which for a studio is remarkable, frankly, you know, at 25, 30% margins. So she's making, you know, $500,000, $600,000 a year, and she's miserable. And not all the time and not in all facets. That's too broad of a brush. But what I told her is, I need to diversify your identity. I need you to not be part of your business on Sunday. That's all I need. Try that first. Leave your phone at home, get your paddleboard, go out in the bay, paddle around with your friends. Don't think about your business. Don't talk about your business. Just be a paddleboarder. Just do that. And she came back the next week and she said, that was amazing. And I said, yeah, it's called recreation. All you do is go outside. Like, it's pretty simple. But when you couch it in the diversification of identity, it becomes meaningful. It's permission to be somebody else. And what does she have to do? She had to take the time to go out and do that, to the exclusion of using that time to improve her business, which is a proxy for making money. She had to trade her time, not for more income, but for the diversification of who she was.
I think starting to wrap this up, and I think that's a good place to begin to move into maybe whatever advice you might have, whatever steps, whatever actions we can take to begin on a very real level, on a very day-to-day basis, moving ourselves toward this new, what I would argue is better organizing principle. Mm-hmm. What would you, maybe and use your client as the example if it makes sense, but like, how do you start to get somebody from default state to this new paradigm?
Okay. So if you want to make time freedom the organizing principle of your life, first, accurately calculate your need for money, core income, discretionary spending, and saving for future retirement. Do your retirement planning, do your budgeting, and find a way to make only that amount, or if you're like me, only slightly more than that amount, because you just can't just make that amount because it freaks you out. Because you can't not, right? Find a way to only make that amount and do it in less time than you spend working now. So you need to know how long you spend working now, and you need to say, I'm going to spend less time working to make the amount of money I need. Okay. Now, I want you to use the resulting time freedom to diversify your identity through self-development and contribution. That's it, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can sit there and write down, what are all of my identities? What are my tightly held identities? What are my loosely held identities? What are identities I wish I had that I don't? And use your time to develop those ones that you wish you had that you don't, and you'll diversify out. So there's actually a secret to this in being able to make the money you need in less time. And that's to get more per unit time. And I found the way to do that inevitably is to have multiple employers. Mm-hmm. Because they're not concentrating on how much they pay you per unit time. They're concentrating on how much they pay you in total, in absolute amounts. And so if you have 20 employers who each pay you $200 an hour, and you work for those 20 employers 20 hours a week, right? You're going to make, what's that, 16,000 gross a month. And if you lose 3 or 4 or 5 of those employers, you still have 15 of them paying you $200 an hour. Now you only work 15 hours a week instead of 20. And if your needs are small, you can still win. So the secret here is multiple employers. And whether you do that as a freelancer, whether you literally do that through multiple part-time jobs, you can. And so ask yourself the counter questions to those steps, which is, do you have more money after accounting for discretionary retirement spending than you need? Okay. Are you saving that money for an undefined use? Would you rather not make it in the first place and have more time? Figure out a way to do that. How do you leverage your skills to make more money when you need it? And then the last thing that I would tell people to ask themselves is, if I cut your income in half today, what would you do? What would you do to your lifestyle? What changes would you make? Can you make those changes voluntarily instead of in response to a crisis? Can you need less? And can you be creative about that? Can you treat it as a challenge and as fun rather than as self-restriction? Because if I can start to change my time for money and my money for time and turn down my need, I get all the power in the world to exercise agency however I care to.
Love it. I think that is a good place to wrap up. Again, if folks want to read all of those behaviors of the time aware as well as all the others, the best place to do that is optimalagency.co. Click on the tab at the top where you can read the rules, you can read the behaviors, you can read much more about Optimal Agency. Again, optimalagency.co is the best place to do that. Okay, wrapping up this conversation, I would love to, we haven't done this in a little bit, but I want to talk to you about what you're working on, what we're working on, what I'm working on as it relates to our rules and our behaviors as we see fit. I think we did this at the end of last year, so we haven't done it in a little bit, but I'd love to know what what are you focused on? What do you, across these rules and behaviors, or really anything in this, that would fit inside of this world of agency, other than mushroom farming, which I think we should do an entire episode on. What are you doing over there?
Yeah, what I know about mushroom farming would fill up 3 minutes of an episode. So still working on that one. So I'm working on eating unprocessed food and cooking my own meals. And I've recently thrown a massive wrench in that. For the last 10 days or so, and that's probably an overestimation, last 7 days or so, Annie and I have gone completely vegan.
Ooh, interesting.
So the driver here is blood pressure. Despite doing all of these health behaviors, sleeping, beautifully, frankly, eating unprocessed foods, exercising a ton, like my resting heart rate's like literally in the 40s at night. I still have high blood pressure. And I started reading this book called How Not to Age. And it's this incredibly dense tome on the scientific research around nearly everything to do with health. I mean, it's so comprehensive, it will blow your mind. Like I started reading it and I'm sitting in the living room, in front of the fireplace talking to Annie. And I'm like, babe, if I keep reading this book, we're not going to eat meat anymore. Like I'm on page 10, right? Yep. And, I get to page 100. I'm like, we're not eating meat anymore. I get to page 200 and I have taken the whey protein and put it in the pantry and ordered plant-based protein. And then we've said, well, let's go get some vegan cookbooks. And so I don't know how to cook anymore. Like as of this week, I don't know how to cook anymore because I have no idea how to eat whole food plant-based, right? Here's the other thing that's kicking my ass, man. It is nothing like 30, 40, 30, right? Protein, carbs, fats. It's more like 15% protein. And it's like that, given everything we're hearing about upping protein intake, about taking protein in, et cetera, says like all my muscles are going to fall off. I'm not going to be able to do athletic activity anymore. And I'm going to die prematurely. Right. Except the early sign, my blood pressure has gone way down almost instantly. Right. It turns out that chicken often has saline injected in it.
Okay.
To make it weigh more, literally.
Yep.
You know what saline is, of course. Salt and water.
Yep.
And you know what drives up blood pressure? Salt. Yeah. Right. And so I was taking in these huge amounts of sodium I had no idea I was taking in. And at the same time, the thing that we like as athletes about protein intake, that it signals increases in mTOR, mechanical target rapamycin, that it signals insulin-like growth factor 1 that helps us get, jacked, bro.
Yep.
That same stuff is implicated tremendously in the diseases of aging in the literature. And so I'm looking at this going, this is completely contrary to everything I know. And frankly, it's contrary to societal norms around masculinity. Hey, let's not eat meat. Are you crazy? Like, okay, I'm mushroom farming, driving a Prius and not eating meat. Like 30-year-old me would beat me up.
Yeah,
like
he wouldn't like you.
I used to go to work with Navy SEALs, and now I go
actively choosing more time than money, not eating meat. Yeah. 30-year-old John would.
What's going on? Yeah. What's going on here? Genuinely, and so anyway, that's what I'm working on, man. I've got to learn to cook this way, and I'm going to try it, and I'm not trying it half-assed. I'm all in. I stopped eating sugar in the beginning of January, preparing for the hill climb on the fat bike up the Mount Washington Auto Road. And I just didn't start again. It was kind of like when I quit drinking. You quit for long enough and you're just like, I don't know, why bother? Why bother anymore? So I'm not eating sugar, and I'm not eating meat. I'm not eating eggs. I'm not eating dairy. Everything's plant-based. And I'm freaking out, man. I'm freaking out.
Are you doing this? Gosh, we don't have to spend all day on this, but I'm fascinated. Is this something like, hey, let's do this for 90 days and let's just see how we feel, how we like it, and then we'll reassess? Or do you get the sense that like, no, I've made the decision. this is the way it's going to be. And now we're just learning how to do that. How much wiggle room do you feel like there is left in the decision?
Well, everything should, if you don't learn that everything should be fluid, you're not learning. So I took for granted for a long, long time as much protein as possible, right? Chicken and fish are cleaner meats than red meat, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And it turns out a lot of these things just may not be true. May not be true. In other words, I might be able to preserve my muscle mass by lifting while eating plants. Right? And if that's true, and it lowers the, I'm not convinced. I'm not 100% convinced, except what are the biomarkers going to do? Was my cholesterol the same as the lower bound on it, or the upper bound of acceptability? Like, why was it there when I was doing everything right? Why is my blood pressure high when I'm doing everything right? Well, the answer can either be you're doing everything right, or you're not. You're clearly not. The physiological markers do not bear out what you thought was true. And I held it as such a sacred truth, right? Protein intake, chicken's clean, et cetera, et cetera. I don't eat sugar, therefore I am, right? And it turns out that if that's not right, something else has to be. And so this is just a willingness to explore what that is and to throw out any self-identity that might be attached to the old way of doing things or the new way of doing things. There's the joke, like, how do you know somebody's vegan? They tell you, right? And so, like, how do you not attach your identity to that? And so what I'm working on is not only doing it, but hopefully, if it works, not turning into the zealotry of the recently converted.
Fascinating. Okay, well, I'll check in with.
What are you working on?
Decidedly less interesting than that. But back to our health. So that was, you mentioned it. Health rule number 2: eat unprocessed foods and cook your own meals. Mine is actually health rule number 1: build your cardiovascular capacity and muscular strength. This is a bit of a follow along to the exercise first conversation we had, and that's actually the behavior one of the Health Span Enlightened. And in that conversation, we were talking about how basically what I was doing is I'd wake up, I'd go to the garage and be like, well, what do I feel like doing today? And I'd do something more often than not. And a couple of things happened. One is I finally got myself organized, and Michelle and I got ourselves organized, that I had the time to get to a CrossFit gym. I go once a week now, and this is probably 6 to 8 weeks ongoing now. My friend Maddie, she runs CrossFit Harpoon. We've done some work together. I've known her forever. It's just been really hard for me to have the 2 hours necessary to get there, work out, and get back, and all the other things. And so I finally got myself organized. I get over there on Friday mornings now. It's been fantastic. And then the other thing that happened right around that same time after that episode is Jonathan of Digital Barbell, our friend Jonathan and Blakely over at Digital Barbell. We just had them on the show. He was like, hey, dummy, here's some programming.
Oh, did he hear? He heard the episode?
He was much kinder than that. Yeah, he was much kinder than that. He says, hey, I could help you with that. So he was very kind. He sent me some program, just some, I think it's I don't know if it's 6 or 8 week, just kind of program that they already have pre-built, sent me the app and sent me the login. And so I've been doing that along with Friday mornings at the CrossFit gym. And of course, again, like, this is silly. And of course I knew this, but like, having a plan, a lot better than not having a plan.
Turns out.
So that's what I'm doing is I wouldn't say that I'm working out more in terms of just like overall time, but the organization of it, the structure of it, the knowing that I've got already something figured out that I'm going to do tomorrow and that I did today makes all the difference. And so that's what I've been doing, is just getting a little bit more organized, systematized, and more successful at health rule number 1, instead of just kind of winging it because I know enough to wing it.
Yeah.
That's basically the excuse I was using. It's like, I can do this, but actually getting a little bit more organized has been great.
Well, and I love that you're bringing other people into the ecosystem of those helping you achieve that goal, right? So now you've got Maddie at CrossFit Harpoon. You've got all the people that are in that class you go to at CrossFit Harpoon. You've got Jonathan and Blackley helping you out. Like, you've got, it's not you in a garage now. It's you in an ecosystem of people that say building your muscle mass and your cardiovascular capacity matters.
That's it.
Sweet, dude.
Yeah, man. All right, brother. That's fun, as always. Thank you. I really, the vegan thing, I'm going to be thinking about that for a while, but thank you. Thanks, everybody out there for listening.
Don't read that book.
Don't read that book. All right, my friends. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. Thank you for your ratings and your reviews. One more reminder, head to optimalagency.co to learn more about this project, and specifically go take your HWT questionnaire, figure out where you are across health, wealth, and time. We invite you and we thank you in advance for doing so. John and I will be back next week for another episode of the Optimal Agency Podcast.